So today's topic is directing sex and violence. And I will read from my book in a minute, but Nick, tell me why you were looking so forward to this.
I have a lot of ideas rolling through my head that my therapist suggests I get out of my head and onto and have some either in writing or film or video. And I guess I just have a lot of Peckinpah in me, or Tarantino, I guess, and obviously certain issues I'd love to see actually how they might look on film, video. So I've been writing abstracts, and there's always a little bit of ass kicking in them, and there's always a little bit of getting even, and so that just keeps coming up. So I'm very interested in how I might approach that, and really looking forward to what you have to say.
Well, I have a couple of different things to say. I'll get to it. There's a bunch of people still coming in, so I'll do that, when people are here. Does anybody else who's just joining us want to share why they're here for this particular topic today? Nobody?
Yeah, well, for me, it's been an interesting evolution in watching violent scenes through time. I mean, something like Ride the High Country, where it's more master shots and there's not the close intercutting, and then you go something like John Wick, and even though it's closer to, it's kind of like a real intermediate, because Keanu really did train so they can use the shot, and just seeing how it's cut together, and it's like, okay, how much of that is editing, how much of it is little pieces, and so just trying to, the dynamics of that. And then the same goes with sex scenes, is how rehearsed it seems like it needs to be choreographed down to the minutia, so everyone is on the same page. The same way with fight scenes. And I a lot of this I'm taking just from stage training, stage combat, and thinking it's choreographed, it's danced, and it's sped up, and it's never done at full speed until everyone is comfortable. And so there's this whole choreography that goes on. And I think, or seem to feel like, that's the same way with fight scenes.
I think it is. Now, there's one, I don't know if you were there, Doug, or maybe you were, when Starina Johnson was talking about a fight scene that she was in a movie, and the guy was actually beating her up.
Yes, and it was scared. Yes, I was there for that. And that was frightening, because I thought, well, that's something I wanted to ask about, because it's like, wait a second, that's crossing a line. You're actually hurting someone.
Right, exactly. I will wait one more. It's 5 minutes after. I'll wait one more minute just to see who else pops in. And then I will begin, and then just let people in as they come. All right, first, I'm going to read the chapter. And it's not a very long one, so I'm just going to read the whole thing. From Filmmaking Confidential, Directing Sex Scenes. Some people say there's nothing sexy about filming a sex scene. I'd like to say that's mostly true, but the truth is, sometimes they can be incredibly sexy. One of the secrets of filming a sex scene is the same as filming a scene with gruesome violence. Basically, anything that is supposed to be graphic should always follow the rule of less is more. Give the audience something to feel, and they will feel it. If you show it to them, they will not feel it. Instead, they will look at it. The more they see, the less they feel. Whereas if you limit the graphic shots, you will give the audience a visceral reaction to what you're showing them. In my film, Watch Out, there is a scene at the end where we had to film some toes being cut off of actress and best-selling author Gillian Lauren. The only reason this scene works is because the graphic visuals are kept to a precise minimum. There are 3 short moments when we see something graphic in that scene. And each shot is less than a second. The sound effects create something so gross and violent that the audience isn't really conscious of the fact that they are, in fact, not seeing much of anything. The best sex scenes are done in the same way. The more you hear breathing, see shots of skin in the shadows, avoiding the explicit and the more erotic it will be. Another secret to sex scenes is to involve the actors. Ask them what parts of their bodies they are comfortable with showing and what parts they are not. Most people know their bodies well enough to tell you from what angle certain shapes or features are accentuated and which angles to avoid. If you can bring your actors into the creation of a sex scene or a graphically violent scene, they will also be more comfortable in the process of filming it. It is also a good idea to keep them as relaxed as possible, or else it will show on screen. Unless the intent is to show nervousness, in which case it might be useful to not involve them in order to accentuate their nervousness. If you're doing a sex scene with a woman who loves her breasts but hates the way her butt looks, or a guy who loves his ass but doesn't think his abs are good enough, it can be really fun to use these obstacles as fuel to inspire your storyboards and shot list. Don't think about them as obstacles, but rather an exciting experiment in creation. How can you storyboard a list of shots that gives the actors what they want and also the audience what they want, without compromising either side? I love challenges like this. It's also a good idea to have a closed set when doing any kind of graphic scene. There is no reason for every person to be present. You only need the DP, the director, and the sound guy, maybe the makeup and hair person. Gaffers and grips, assistants, and the like can easily step outside for the take and return immediately after the shot. The less people present, the more comfortable the actors will be and the better the scene will be. So that's the scene, or the book, the chapter, Jesus, from the book, Filmmaking Confidential, on directing sex scenes and also in dealing with violence in the same way. Now, I'm using examples of certain things that I've done, and I want to talk also about what some other filmmakers have done. And I'm not saying shy away from it, because I think that it's important to sometimes be graphically and brutally explicit in order to prove the point. And the more that you are, the more you separate yourself from everybody else. In that same movie, Watch Out, where we cut the girl's toes off, earlier on in the movie, there is an ejaculation scene. And the character in question is a narcissist who is obsessed with himself. He doesn't like men or women. He literally just only likes himself. And it's a really strange movie. It was based on a really crazy book. And in the movie, there's a moment where there's often moments where he's with a blow-up doll having sex, and he's taped his headshot to the face of the blow-up doll. So this is a true narcissist. And the movie is so far out there that you didn't need to really be all that explicit. So there's a scene when he's in this restaurant and he gets so turned on by himself, he has to go into the bathroom and masturbate. And just when you think I'm not going to show you, I show you. But I show you for just like that much. And it's just enough to say, wait a minute, did I just see that? And then if you rewind it, sure enough, yeah, you did. You totally saw it. And it was all right there, right in front of your face. And in the second half of the movie, it's a little bit like American Psycho in the sense that this guy is actually killing people. And in a couple of the deaths, and they're terrible. I mean, like in one scene with his professor who, didn't think he was a very good student, he dismembers his penis, and which you don't necessarily see, but then he tries to shove it down his throat. And that you do see briefly. and we had to get the prosthetic, thing that's right there by his face, but it's all bloody and everything. So you can't quite make it out, but you can make out enough that you're like, oh, yep, that's exactly what that is. And a couple of the other deaths weren't as gruesome. And then there was the scene where he's cutting the girl's toes off with a big garden shears, that you would like trim a branch with. And when we were working on that film, I remember Paul N.J. Otteson, who won the Oscars for sound design for The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. And I think he was nominated for Spider-Man 2. I don't think he won. Was the sound designer and mixer for my first 3 movies, and then consulted the following 2 or 3. And then I started working with everybody that he had been working with, because he got way too fancy. I mean, he was already fancy when I started out with him. But he taught me that the biggest mistake people in the audience make when they're watching a horror film per se, and they know that there's going to be a gruesome kill coming up, is that they close their eyes. And what's interesting is you should do the opposite and actually close your ears. Because if you watch a really, really violent scene and just mute it, it's the dumbest thing you've ever seen. It's all in the sound effects. So the sound effects go in and paint the picture in your mind of what you're feeling as a viewer. So, the crunch and the and all these things that make it so terrible, if you're just looking at it, even if there are moments of explicitness, it's really quite dumb. It's like it really, go get the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or any other super violent movie and watch 5 or 10 minutes of those scenes silently, and you'll see what I mean, or you'll hear what I mean, rather. It's pretty remarkable. And likewise, if you're watching a sex scene and there's all this heavy breathing and there's like sweaty, sticky sounds and there's all this other stuff going on, if you mute it and watch it, it's probably, unless it's porn, it probably isn't even interesting looking. Even if there are a few, split seconds of something, graphic or explicit. Typically, the way that sex and violence are, they're almost the same. And I look at it in a similar way that one would think of as good or bad. So if somebody loves your movie or they hate your movie, they have this passion that is about this far away from each other. So it's not a big, long line where love is on one side and hate's on the other. It's actually like love and hate are like this, and there's a big circle that goes around. These are all the different emotions, and love and hate are right next to each other. And that's the same thing to say about, good, bad, right, wrong, sex, violence, night, day, like whatever. You can think of any sort of like yin yang situation, and it's the same. There are sex scenes that can be violent. There can also be violent scenes that can be erotic. So I've never really explored pairing those two before. I've had a few physical assaults or sexual assaults in some of my movies, so I've done it on that end of it, but I've never done a violent scene that ended up being somehow erotic in a way, which could be interesting. So on that sense, even though I'm saying, and you don't have to be somewhat non-specific or non-explicit, because I just mentioned I was explicit in a couple of those projects. I chose to show it that way. And part of the reason is that most often people don't. So, if it's like they're afraid to show it, or they're afraid of what somebody might think, or they're afraid of getting a bad an X rating, or, I don't know, NC-17 or whatever it is. So they withhold a little bit. And because they do that, or for some reason, I've seen it more and more since Short Bus was made, which had explicit sex in it. There have been movies that I've seen that have shown explicit sex that are just as pornographic as any porn movie made, but because they happen in the context of a feature film with a narrative and characters and emotion, it's somehow not only really, really effective, but it makes that movie stand out as, controversial, or everybody's talking about it. Oh my God, did you see that scene? We go all the way back to, oh my God, I can't believe the name is escaping me, with Marlon Brando. Last Tango in Paris. If you at that time go out of the box, you will get noticed. Your movie will get seen. So, my film Watch Out, that had those explicit moments in it, was nominated for Best International Feature at Raindance and half a dozen other film festivals in Europe and other places in the country, in the world. And had I not shown the explicit moments, I don't know if it would have been. Maybe, but I really doubt it. I think that sometimes going too far is exactly going far enough, or going as far as you need, rather, in order to prove the point. How many of you saw what's his face's, I never remember names, Nymphomaniac? Did you guys see, did anybody see that?
I remember that one.
The one thing that I really, really was looking forward to about that movie was early on in the, I don't know whether it was, they were shooting it, Lars von Trier, right? And I read some articles about either Uma Thurman or Shia LaBeouf or a couple of the other people that were in it were going to be seen in explicit sex scenes. And what he had done was either develop some kind of software motion tracking where he would have, Uma Thurman in the shot or Shia LaBeouf in the shot, and you would see their genitalia, but it wouldn't actually be theirs. It would be their stand-in who had agreed to be photographed explicitly, and then he would sort of motion track with the famous actor so that the viewer wouldn't know. It would look exactly right. You would think, oh my God, I'm watching this famous actor being this porno, this sex scene in this movie. And I was really, really excited about that, because that was after I had made my film Watch Out, and I was hoping that he really went all the way with it. Because I would have. If I was doing a movie called Nymphomaniac, and it started, some of the early trailers that we saw were just mind-blowingly beautiful, just the camera and the composition and the setup. I was so excited for finally there to be a beautiful, well-composed, incredibly well-acted, explicit movie. And when I watched it, I was really disappointed, because I thought my version that I had made up in my head was far more exciting than what he did. And then I later wondered if that sort of motion tracking software that he had developed didn't quite work, maybe. I mean, there were a couple of moments in the movie where you could kind of see something that was explicit, but basically it was a lot of just explicit situations that really weren't all that explicit or shocking. And then there were also, some explicit dialogue, some words that alluded to explicitness. But that movie with Julia Roberts, Natalie Portman, and that other guy, who Mike Nichols directed this movie, I think. And again, that name is escaping me. had very, very explicit dialogue in it, so much so that it was based off a famous play, I think, also. That you couldn't believe that these actors were saying this. It was pretty amazing. I mean, I had never heard words like that come out of Julia Roberts' mouth, and it was amazing to hear. But so those situations are, I mean, I think it also depends about, you know, what's the nature of the movie and what's the purpose of the sex and the violence. If your purpose is to sicken or to cause a reaction that's meant to be taken grotesquely, versus is what you want them to feel, you know, a little naughty, or a little tingly, or a little frightened, or a little scared. I think that more emotion can be exchanged and communicated by showing less. And I don't mean keep it, you know, PG-13. I mean, you know, go on. And I mean, Hitchcock wanted to go farther with the shower scene in Psycho. And the way that he worked his way around it was, I think he had a shot showing Janet Leigh's breasts, because he knew that the studio wouldn't go for the breasts. So he distracted them from the rest of that scene by showing the breasts. And so they were only fixated on the breasts, and they weren't thinking about how many times she was getting stabbed. And so he fought them on the breasts and lost, but then he kept the rest of the scene intact. But had he gone in with no breasts, they would have said, oh, you can't stab her that many times. You have to do this and this and this. So he filmed it, and it was in the, you know, one of the early cuts that he showed the studio. And then that's how he got that scene made. Which I love that story, but I'm not sure, you know, today, I think the only thing about, except today, I mean, Short Bus was made, you know, Nymphomaniac was made. There are movies that are made that have explicit sex in them, but I don't know how easily it would be to have a explicit sex scene in a major studio movie, unless you try to distract them that way somehow. I'm not so, I don't know. But again, we're going back to independent cinema, and the whole purpose about independent cinema is that we are in competition with a worldwide market, where if we don't stand out, no one's going to know who we are. You know, we don't have $100 million of our advertising budgets to make sure that people know about our movies. And if we did, then we could make the dumbest movie in the world, and everybody would go see it because we've just spent $100 million on marketing it. But those are my big first two takes on handling sex and violence. And there's some other things I want to talk about in relationship to working with actors and people in both of those cases. But before we move on, does anybody have any commentary or questions about this first part?
Well, early on, you'd mentioned the sound, and that's one of the things in Psycho that's so powerful, is the sound drives the scene more than her screaming in that shower scene. And I mean, everyone knows it because of the sound. So it's, to me, that goes back to what you said originally when the editor was saying, oh, the sound, you know, if you plug your ears, but if you have that sound, that carries them. That makes it frightening still to this day. Yeah.
And even if you close your eyes and look away, you're still hearing it just as vividly. And but if you did both, then you'd really be fine. But if you plugged your ears and turned away and looked at the ceiling, you'd have no idea what's going on.
Steve, I can't recall the scene exactly, but in Scarface, when the guy is in the shower getting chopped to pieces with a chainsaw. I can't recall if you actually see that or if you just see um, uh, Tony's reaction to the whole thing and spattered with blood, et cetera, et cetera. I can't recall, but that's kind of interesting. You can always use the reaction to help underscore just how violent something is without actually showing it.
Yeah. I love that too, because whether or not it did happen, it's been so long since I've seen that I can't remember. But you know, the fact that you don't remember means that you probably saw it in your mind, whether he showed it or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to further date myself, I think I've come up with an example of violence being erotic. Warm leatherette, anyone? Anybody remember that? Okay. Okay. 80s.
No,
anyway.
but I'm writing it down.
Warm leatherettes, and that's an interesting little piece of music.
All right, amazing.
Yeah, I was looking up one, Irreversible, which is a French movie, which is with Vincent Cassel, and it's basically there's a rape scene in an underground Paris tunnel that goes on, and it's so violent, and I don't remember, but I felt like it was in one take, and it's such a committed scene by both the actors in it. It's frightening, and then there's a murder scene later on that's the same way, where you go, did I just happen? And you're right, my memory has filled in the blanks, but at the moment seeing it, I thought, whoa, what was going on? So that movie has both of those things, which was just and it's shot in reverse, which is even more interesting. You see it backwards, the movie backwards from.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely one to check out.
We've talked a couple of times prior on these little episodes of Man Bites Dog.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never seen that movie until about a month ago. And I had heard about it for years. And someone recommended it to me, and I watched it. And I think it came out in 1995, 6, or 7. I can't remember when, maybe even a little earlier. And I could not believe how explicit that film is. And it sort of catches you a little off guard, because the whole movie is not explicit, you know, but it really is. There are some moments, there are some scenes that I have never seen either that explicit and grotesque and violent and just all laid out there the way they were. I highly recommend it. I mean, if it came out today, it would be beyond what we would expect to see. I mean, it's crazy. If you haven't seen it, it's mind-blowing.
The only one like that I've ever seen is called the Serbian Film, which is just, it's a reflection of Serbia and the politics, but it's done in such a frightening way that there's scenes in that where you just can't believe it, and the story, so. Yeah.
Now, on this same note, because there are movies like this, and because Tarantino does what he does, and because you know, there are certain directors, you know, who excel in the sequences of violence or violent natures in their films. They're so often done that I think if you're going to do it and sort of do one up or one a little bit more intense or a little bit, you know, you'd really have to go far out or find just a strange, unique way to do it, because I feel like there are so many, and when I say younger filmmakers, I don't even mean age, I just mean newer, who love Tarantino, so they're going to emulate him, or they're going to make all these movies that are sort of, you know, versions of what they would do if they were Tarantino, or something like that. And I don't know if they're as effective for the viewer. they might be effective for some people, of course, and they might be effective for you to sort of work through some of those things. But I think that, like those two scenes that you were talking about, Doug, the rape and then the death scene, and especially if it was something sort of all one shot, which is what gave me the idea of Man Bites Dog to comment on after that, was the idea of sort of the way, if it's presented almost like a documentary, then you don't have the cuts and you don't have the sort of cinematic rhythm of it obviously being fake.
No, and that's what was so scary about it, because it felt like almost a voyeuristic, twisted thing where you're watching something that's so violent, so just in the moment that, and of course, afterwards you think, there's no way they did this more than 1 or 2 times takes. There's just no way. There's no cuts here. There's just, emotionally, it's so draining on both of them.
Yeah. I always think it's interesting. Especially the what?
The woman, especially the woman, what she's going through.
Totally. And I saw a similar scene, and I can't remember from what film it was in, that was also a foreign film. And the performers were so good. I mean, it's like, even when you're watching the movie that Bjork did with Lars von Trier, she's so devastating in that part that you forget it's Bjork. I mean, that's what's so amazing about it, because it's, you know, she's a huge star, and here she is, and it's so terrible what's happening to her every time you turn around that you forget that it's her, because it's just this watching misery unfold before your eyes, you know, and just the depths of hell, you know, that someone could endure. And it's, I think, a little bit even more effective when you don't know who the person is. If it's just, you know, an actor that's in it, maybe she's famous over there. But, you know, if we don't necessarily know them, I think it can even be more intense. Are there any, aside from Doug, any other actors here joining us today? Because I was going to ask about performing in scenes like this. You know, if you're in a sex scene, doesn't matter if it's explicit or not, or if you're in a violent sort of fight scene or some sort of an abusive scene, you know, what does it take as a performer to not just go there, but go there realistically, and then could we take 2, take 3, take 4? You know, it's like, even if it's all one shot, they probably may have done that twice, if not 3 times.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes, Nick.
So my experience was an equity waiver. Women behind bars, campy take on women in prison, where I'm getting raped as the only guy in the play. I'm getting raped by, you know, 12 angry women, and I just you know, it was a full nude scene, and you know, I was throwing myself around at their, you know, amplifying what they were doing to me. I was actually throwing myself around to add a little impact to that. And then also in Sleeping Around, which was a 12-act thing. I get, you know, there were 2 sex scenes that I was involved in, the first 2 scenes, and they were dramatically different. One was comic, the other was really dark. And you know, I mean, it was I don't know if that translates into what we're talking about, but I had to you know, you work out all the blocking and whatnot, and the comfort zones and all that you described earlier. But still, you have to have like a commitment, significant commitment to to forget about everything else and just be there in the moment, which,
When you did that, how many people were around you, like on the crew, that you didn't need to be there?
well, there were 99 people in the audience. So.
Oh my God. Oh, so it was live stage.
Live stage. Yeah, live
Okay.
stage. So, like I said, I'm not sure it translates into this situation, but
well, no, it does, because you're still performing and you still have to be there and do it. I mean, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the one thing that I have learned working with actors in, whether it's a fight scene or any other kind of scene that requires a physical interaction, is the person who's being injured, hurt, or thrust upon or whatever is the person actually doing it. The person who's it looks like they're doing it isn't actually the one doing it. So, for instance, if I'm supposed to be strangling, if this person's if I'm supposed to be being strangled, the person will put their hand, here really loosely, and then I'm going to do it with this side of my microphone. I'll put my hand like, this on this side, and their hand's really loose, but I'm the one that's yanking.
Selling it. You're selling it. Yeah,
exactly. And so if, let's say there's a rape scene and the person being raped, was this your case when it was on stage? Like, you sort of mentioned this, where it's like they were doing all this, but you were the one throwing yourself around. They weren't actually kicking you and, beating you and whatever else, right? Yeah, okay. So in that regard, the making of it is, it's tricky. There's some choreography. There's some knowing the limits, obviously. As we mentioned earlier, I have a friend who's an actress who was in a film, and she was actually beaten up in the film. And she's a tough cookie. So she kept going, and it didn't, it scared me listening to it. I don't know if it scared her so much. And that was Storina Johnson. I'll just say her name again, because you can go and listen to that interview too. She, I don't think it had ever happened before or since, but I've heard other stories of people. And in fact, I think, of course, I wasn't there, and I don't know what happened and what the truth was or anything like that. But I have heard stories that the woman in Last Tango in Paris wasn't aware that they were going to do and film certain things until they were doing them. So, that's something that, is totally inappropriate, but, people have bad stories. And so my advice is, if you're going to be responsible for creating something like this, as I said in the book, if you engage with the people that you're working with and have them decide, I didn't ask the actor, I didn't give, in my film Watch Out, I didn't hand him the script and say, you have to ejaculate. I said, it would be really good if you did. But if you don't want to, that's fine. There's enough going on in this movie already. We don't have to have it. But I'm just saying, if we do, it's going to be crazy. And when it came time to film that scene, we were in this like bed and breakfast restaurant. Well, it had been a former bed and breakfast, but it had been turned into a restaurant, and it was decorated like somebody's grandmother's, needlepoint living room with terrible flower wallpaper, and it was just the least sexually evocative room you could ever imagine. And the bathroom was even worse. Like, it didn't inspire any sort of thoughts of, I heard this after the fact. So we let the actor go in there and prepare on his own. And we have everything set up, the lights, the cameras, the boom, and everything else. And all we're going to do is, when he's really, really close, we're going to run in, film everything, and then let him, take care of himself afterwards, like clean up or whatever. And we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and it's just not happening. It's like it's like the minutes are going by, the hours almost. I mean, and he's like, this isn't working for me, because the wallpaper and the room and the all this other, and the pressure of like, you know, there's nobody in this room, but there are 20 people standing outside, 3 of which are going to come in here and, you know, operate the camera and make sure the boom is over my head. But otherwise, I'm aware of those people out there. And then I'm aware of all the tens of thousands of people that are going to see this. You know, I mean, I don't know what was going through his head, but at one point, finally, he called for us. There may have been a close call. Like there may have been a call and then like, well, never mind. And then there was another call. And whenever that came, we finally got the shot, if you will. And it's funny because it's in the movie for less than a second. I mean, it's not even a full 24 frames. But it is right there for you. And it was interesting because afterwards, when I screened that film in Los Angeles, Karen Black was at that screening, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, I am so happy you went as far as you went. She was like, thank God you did, because a movie like this has to. And so that's when I was like, oh, okay. So it's not only just about how you present it or do it and what's around it, but really it has to do with what is the movie? What is the kind of movie? You know, if it's an art film from Europe called Nymphomaniac, I don't know if you need to or you don't need to, because it's sort of like, if it's there and it's explicit, well, of course it is, because it's a European movie called Nymphomaniac. So it's not all that shocking. You know, it's like, that's sort of what you're paying for. If it's, you know, a cross-country road trip, like if I were going to redo a movie like, not E2 Mama Tambien or whatever it is, I would have a cross-country coming-of-age road trip where the 2 people in the car, the Bonnie and Clyde, if you will, are not only raping and killing people at every time they stop to get gasoline or spend, you know, the night at the hotel, but they're also doing that with each other. And it's turning into something where it's like, by the end of the road trip, they either have to kill each other or kill themselves, or, you know, that's just the end of it. Or, you know, it's just like, it's one of those, like, they need to go off the cliff. They need to do a Thelma and Louise. It's like, if you're doing something like that, I guarantee someone will want to watch that movie. It may not be your cup of tea, but I guarantee you that someone will want to watch that movie. And if you're doing a coming of age road trip without all that, I promise you, no one will watch it. I mean, maybe 20 or 30 people, but not a lot. Nick, were you going to ask something or say something?
Yeah, is California, spelled with a K, a good example of what it just came to mind as you were describing the road trip and increasing violence towards an even more violent end. That movie came to mind. Do you recall that?
You know, I've seen it, and I do,
okay.
And I can't really remember it.
David Duchovny and this really hot chick in a black Lincoln convertible pick up Brad Pitt and Juliette Phillips as
Julie Lewis, yeah.
Julie Lewis, thank you very much. And they end up they're going cross country on the way to LA, and Brad Pitt's character just can't stop killing people as they stop for gas, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I mean,
Yeah.
But you know, it's like, okay, so that's a Hollywood movie again, you know, with Hollywood people. So if, you know, they probably, I mean, in some of those cases, I imagine that the scripts were censored along the way. I mean, you know, Hitchcock always wanted to have, you know, boobs and, you know, violent death. And when he did his film Frenzy, which was his last film that was a British-made film, it was the first time he got to show a fully frontal nude woman in one of his films, even though he'd always wanted to. It's just that the censors wouldn't allow it. And, you know, today it's like, what would the censors allow or not allow? I mean, at this point, I can't imagine. I mean, what I never understood why there was such a big fuss over the human centipede. I mean, it's disgusting, but you know, everybody was so against it, and it was, you know, censored and banned and all this stuff. It's almost like I feel a little bit like the banning and the censoring was part of their marketing strategy. You know, like they're like, you have to ban this because otherwise no one will ever see it, which is the truth. You know, it's like I don't know how they pulled that off, but certainly it worked. But I swear there are other films that are more violent and graphic than that. It's just, it maybe isn't just as disgusting. I mean, I don't know. For those of you who aren't familiar with that movie, I'm not going to describe it for you, but Wikipedia does a very nice job.
I think South Park did a take on that as well.
Oh my God, yeah, the South Park version is even better. Look up the South Park version and you'll get the idea.
Well, on that point, if I might say, isn't the American public basically shock-proof? I mean, what is it that we cannot see on all kinds of pornographic websites, or take South Park, the parody of Grapes of Wrath, where the father has a fetish of seeing Japanese girls urinate in each other's mouths. And I don't know if you remember that one. Some guy draws these stick figures of the Japanese girls urinating in each other's mouths. I mean, it hasn't it come to the point that it's I mean, frankly, if I see a sex scene coming up in a movie, it's time for me to go refill my popcorn. I mean, what is it that I haven't seen? And then in terms of violence, the last time I saw John Wick, my friend and I each had these little counters, and we made bets on how many people John Wick would kill. And I think he came up with 112, I came up with 114. I mean, it's funny. I mean, there's nothing horrible, horrifying. It's funny, a John Wick movie. I mean,
yeah,
aren't we shock-proof? I am.
Yes, and that's why I think maybe even sometimes, if everybody's going, you know, blue, I say go red because you'll stick out. You know, they're opposite colors. So at this point, if you do a movie where, you know, it's all, I mean, I think psychological horror, for instance, is a lot scarier than physical, like gore horror. Even if there are some, you know, violent and some graphics that are shown that are violent in, like The Shining, I still think it's one of the most well-crafted horror films. Likewise with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I need to rewatch that because I feel like there isn't all that much actually in it. It's just a lot of sound and a lot of things you think you're seeing, but you're not actually.
Because that was an independent, super low budget movie that just took off.
Right.
I remember that too. Is thinking, wow.
And the other thing is, you know, it's like, yes, I do think we've seen it all except the things that they don't want us to see, which is confronting some of the underlining problems with our culture. So for instance, my film Pep Squad, which is a satire on American school violence, came out in all sorts of parts of the world where they loved it because it showed the hypocrisy and the ridiculousness of America. Yet in America, it could only be released as a horror film, even though it is a subversive satire, making fun of the situation. So in some of those cases, it's like even the distributors who are well aware that controversy sometimes means lots of money. You know, there were lots of people who, we were in discussions with a major, I won't mention which one, although I'm always tempted, to release the film, and then the weekend Columbine happened. They called and said, no one will touch this now with the 10-foot pole. And my first instinct was, oh, no, you should totally release it, because it's showing you part of the problem. And of course, everybody would have said it was bad taste, too soon. It would have been on all the newspapers, and everybody would have known about it. It would have been free advertising, and they would have made a lot of money. Even though they would have found ways to hide it and not give it to me, they would have made a lot of money. And it took a good 2 years before Hollywood Video decided to do an exclusive release in all of their stores, and they marketed it like, if you looked at the cover, it just looked like a horror film. And horror film viewers are pretty smart people. So none of them had a problem with it, but I thought it was a little unfair, because if I were expecting a teenage slasher movie and I got home and watched this movie, I might be disappointed because my expectations weren't met. But nobody seemed to be all that worried about it but me. Does anybody have any direct questions about how to deal with sex or violence? Or maybe you might have a situation or a script or a scene or a shoot where you don't know how to handle it, or you want some advice or anything of the sort? Yes, Linus.
Okay. One of my favorite movies, I think the most brilliant comedies of all time, is Team America World Police. And one of the marketing sticks was the 25-minute sex scene between two marionettes. I don't know if you remember that. It starts off with the missionary position. It starts then with the woman on top, and then they go into every kind of acrobatics and so forth, and it is hilarious. And
the uncut version, or the first?
Whatever version I have, it must go on for 20 minutes. It is so funny, so outrageous. I'm a screenwriter, and I'm working on a film where it's a mix between live action and avatars. And when I say avatars, I don't mean like in the film Avatar or in Ready Player One. I mean cartoon avatars, cartoon created by the two protagonists. And one of the protagonists has, I've written a extended sex scene with an older woman. And I simply wrote, wild and creative sex ensues. I mean, do I have to write like every position, every orifice, every vegetable which is stuck in every orifice? Do I have to describe all that? Or will the studio or producer, get someone else or ask me to fill that in? What did I haven't read the screenplay for Team America. I'm curious. I should. What did they write for that sex scene?
Well, my hunch. Well, my first reaction is, if this were something that you were producing or directing, then you wouldn't have to do any of that, because you would already have in your mind's eye what that would be. And you would then make your shot list, and you would talk to your actors, and you'd say, well, what are you willing to do? If the old woman...
They're cartoons. These are cartoons.
Right, exactly.
And the way I've got the shots is that the young guy is shocked by what this old woman wants to do. So you're constantly shifting from the full screen cartoon to the eyes of the guy happens to be an accountant in Pasadena, California, very blue blood, very straight laced. And all of a sudden he's doing these acrobatic sex things. So it's the cartoon. These two people are looking at their monitors. They're fully dressed, let's say. Do I have to describe what the cartoon characters are doing.
Okay, so I'm gonna break this into two parts. So I want to finish addressing the live action part, and then I want to talk about the animation part, because I think that they're two different approaches. But even then, there's different approaches within those. So in a live action case, the shot list and what exactly, what orifices, what positions, whatever will be dictated by the director, the actors, the producer, whoever are the ones doing it. So then I say, well, yes, creative crazy sex ensues, period. You don't need to explicitly explain it. Now, if there were a specific prop or point that would then be tied to something later else in the other place in the movie, I would mention that, just because you would want them to incorporate that, because it's going to come back at some point. But as far as animation goes, it's a little tricky, because on one hand, you will need someone to make that the list for the process of illustrating those boards. And so if there are 4 positions and 5 orifices and 4 or 5 different vegetables and whatever else you mentioned, then I think someone needs to do that, because the person who's sitting down to do the illustrations and actually making the animation will need to know those things. But likewise, that could be the director of the project. It could also be whatever production company it is that says, oh, we need this to have happen. Or you could put it in there. The only thing that you, again, risk doing by putting it in there is alienating some people. But if that's a little bit of the point of the story, like you just said to me, this guy's sort of shocked about what this woman wants him to do. So maybe it actually wouldn't be a bad idea to incorporate a little bit of that. Maybe if it goes on and on and on, you don't need to do that. But to communicate that enough, because when you were mentioning that, I remember you saying it was animation. So I think that that's pretty interesting. I mean, it's interesting, that idea. But then I immediately went to, oh my God, what an amazing thing to do with a live action 85-year-old actress. Like, how brilliant would that movie be? That is something we have not seen. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So do it. Yes.
That's what I hope to create. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
That's my vision.
It's a beautiful angle on a situation that, my sister was in a class at the University of Kansas State University. And I don't remember what the topic was, but it was sex after 60. And she had my dad's sister come in to speak to the students about sex after 60. And she's really a passionate, loud speaker, and she's hilarious, this woman, my aunt. And I wish I could have been there to see it. And I wasn't able to be there. But that is an area of our world that we aren't exposed to. And I understand that the primary ticket-going audience doesn't want to see that. They're not interested in that as much. But there is a huge population that is. So I feel like exactly like Dr. Ruth. And there's a woman called Esther Perel who has this podcast called Where Do We Begin? And it's about relationships, and she just lays it all out there. And she's sort of like a Dr. Ruth in a way. But I love Dr. Ruth because she could get away with certain things that just nobody else was getting away with. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant idea. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about sex or violence? Yes. Well,
I would love to know what you think and how you would do something that we're trying to build. I'm developing a screenplay, and this is like the center of the story. Without getting into too much detail, is this protagonist, and he is the kind of guy who has been sleeping around all over the place. And then he falls in love with a extremely religious girl. And the way that they have to meet is they date with the family involved all the time. So they're always around and they're always there. Now, it reminded me of, eventually they get married, and after the marriage, that's when they consummate the marriage. And I'm really contemplating how to play that out, because it reminded me a little bit of The Godfather, the first one, when he goes to Sicily, and then he meets the girl, and then they go out, and then they have that sex scene. I thought it didn't really capture that moment like I wanted it to. And there's like a lot of that tension, you know, that sexual tension that's there because they're in love, but they can't really do anything because the family's always there. And then the day after the wedding, this happens, and I'm stuck.
I'm gonna tell you, because, and I'm just gonna give you this idea. I'm gonna use it too because it's in another movie that I'm gonna eventually make. But I'm just gonna give it to you now.
Okay.
Now, this, in my case, it was is a movie about 3 or 4 different couples in various different cities, and it's about basically the same sort of thing. It's just different relations, different places, and how they're different. Anyway, in this one case, it was a young, beautiful Middle Eastern couple, neither of whom had ever had sex before and really didn't know anything about it. So the whole premise of their characters were, yes, on their wedding night, here they go, and neither of them know what they're doing. And it's you could do it 2 different ways. You can make it funny. You do it all the ways, honestly, because if you think of, you know, the first times you were ever intimate with another person in your life, it was awkward, you know, and sure, you can see things online, but when you get there to actually do it, you don't know what you're doing, and you're fumbling and you're shaking, and you don't know if that's right. And maybe if you even have less, you know, knowledge in an interaction with somebody, you'd have even less, you know, idea. But what I liked about a situation like that is becomes true intimacy when 2 people have to teach each other about the process at the same time. You know, they're going to be so vulnerable with each other that, you know, they sit down and they kind of know what's supposed to happen, but they'd have no idea. Like, well, what do you do? What do you do first? What are the steps? And of course, they're not going to say it like that because they're too nervous and they don't know what the other person knows or doesn't know, you know? So what's really fun about playing with characters like that is focus on the pure love and intimate exchange. That's how I would do it. And then what I would do is, so, you know, it takes a good 15, 20 minutes you could really spend here in the bedroom, and it's riveting because you don't have to rush through it. And in fact, the longer it takes and the slower and the more quiet and the stiller it is, the more it becomes so thick that the tension, you could just cut it with a knife and spread it on a piece of toast. You know, it's like, it's something really great. And then I think that what I would do, my choice would be, if I were writing that scene or directing that scene, I would immediately after they first do it and they're laying there afterwards, one of them should say immediately, can we do that again? So it's like, you know, and so it's like, and then it's like, they can't stop. It's like, what is this? And then it's like, they sort of like, you know, they quote unquote, let their hair down. It's like they become more relaxed with each other. I mean, that's how I would go with it. You could go the other direction and make it so that it's really uncomfortable or really funny, or afterwards it doesn't go so well. And then, you know, maybe they're like, oh crap, well, had I known this, we wouldn't have gotten married. You know, it's like you could play that in a different direction I've always wondered about the people who do save themselves for marriage and then find out afterwards that the person that they've just married is a terrible lover. It's like, what do you do? I mean, you wouldn't know necessarily if you too were a virgin when you got married, but I've often wondered like how miserable that would be. I mean, I guess if you didn't know, you wouldn't know, but if you did know, God, that would be awful. Well, I thank you all for coming today to hear me go on and on about funny things. Filmmaking Confidential is available wherever books are sold. And although I'm partial to the audiobook because I like my wittiness, sometimes I'm witty and sometimes I'm barely articulate. So
you're witty in the book.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so
do you highlight your asides in the audio that you don't in the book?
What do you mean?
Do you have asides? I mean, is there extra content in the audio versus the book?
There's one little thing that you'd never catch if I didn't tell you what it was. I mean, there's a moment when I really get emotional, but I'm not really like, while I'm talking about it, so you wouldn't know. but if you listen really carefully, there are some nuances like that. I don't know. No, there's no different content. And in fact, thank you, Linus. We'll do it soon again as well. There'll be other meetups coming up on other sorts of different topics. I'm just trying to, get some of the basics covered at this, the first round of stuff. The only thing you do get in the book, Nick, is I have a secret about film scheduling, which we're going to talk about on a future episode, where I have figured out a way to promise my cast and crew that I will never exceed a 12-hour workday. And my favorite thing to do on the first day of a shoot is promise the cast and crew that in front of my producers who begin to panic. Because they're like, oh my God, you can't promise that, you can't promise that. And I do every time, and they just start panicking. And then about the third or fourth day, when they realize that I was serious, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing, And I have like some forms in the appendix of the book that are obviously not included in the audio version. But we'll go over that on the film scheduling secrets meetup that we're doing in soon. All right, everybody. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. And I hope to see more of you on Saturday. And in the meantime, be well, take care. And if you need Absolutely. If you need anything, just holler and I'll be here.